So one of the things that I advocate in the chapter is do a calendar audit. So actually print maybe the last 2 weeks of your calendar, like physically print it. And I want you to go through with a highlighter. And I want you to highlight every meeting, every phone call, everything that you did during those days that you look back and say, gosh, that was not a productive use of my time. And then you also want to identify who invited you to that call or meeting or whatever. So that's where you get your list from. And then when you're sitting down with these individuals, again, notice I said respectful candor. So I'm sitting down with Brandon, and maybe the conversation goes like this. Hey, Brandon, listen, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for always including me in your weekly staff meetings. I know that your intention is for me to be, in the know on what's going on with your team. So thank you. I just want to say thanks. I've really had to realign my priorities of late, and I'm really starting to think about where I spend my time. So I wanted to ask you, would you mind if we take me off the invite list? I'm going to need to catch up with you maybe for a 5 or 10 minute call by the end of the week to see if there's anything I missed. Or we might want to consider sending Jane or Bill from my team. They probably are a little bit more attuned to the work, but I'm not going to be able to attend each week, but I wanted to let you know why. So respectful tone, I was very clear about thanking them, showing gratitude, but then I gave alternatives. I wasn't just saying, stop inviting me, you clown. I mean, that never left my lips. I was respectful and gave you alternatives. That's the thing that makes people cringe about, saying no to anything. They always think there's going to be an adverse reaction.
On this episode of the Leadership Foundry podcast, I get the pleasure of interviewing my co-founder and good friend, Randy Hain. Randy just recently published a new book, Upon Reflection, Helpful Insights and Timeless Lessons for the Busy Professional. Of course, I'm a big fan of Randy. I've been a big fan of Randy for many, many years, but I love this book. Part of why I love this book is it's a little bit countercultural. And it's for two reasons, which Randy will talk about. First, it really makes us as leaders pause and think about and reflect on how we're using our time, how we're showing up, and really where we want to grow. And we're just not accustomed to pausing and reflecting. The second is he dedicates a whole section of the book to how we need to show up as being good human beings. And I think we're in such a divisive time and such a contentious time that the more we can learn skills to bring civility and compassion to the workplace and to each other, the better humans we're going to be. And frankly, the better leaders we're going to be. So listen to my interview with Randy. I know you're going to enjoy it. As I always do, I took lots of notes. Stay tuned to the very end, and I'll share with you my highlights.
Welding together practical insights and powerful conversations to forge world-class leaders. This is the Leadership Foundry podcast.
Randy, my friend, so excited to have you on our podcast, the Leadership Foundry podcast, but really excited about your new book. Thanks. So, Upon Reflection, Helpful Insights and Timeless Lessons for the Busy Professional. So just love this. And I think you've got so many important nuggets in here, practical tips that I've heard you talk about so many times with leaders. But you've also got some new things, some things that I think are important points of reflection and points of recentering for all of us that I think are kind of lost in today's noise. So I really want to have a good conversation about this today.
I look forward to it.
So maybe a good starting place. Tell me a little bit about what prompted you to write the book in the first place. Was there like a spark, a moment, or was it just something that's kind of been on your heart and mind for a while?
It's actually an accidental book. I did not intend to write it. So last year, after Essential Wisdom for Leaders of Every Generation came out.
I'm going to move your microphone a little bit closer.
Sure. All right, thanks. So after Essential Wisdom came out, I found myself in a increasingly reflective phase, doing lots of long walks, lots of thinking, lots of reflecting. And out of that period came a series of blog posts. I just found myself looking to the past, thinking about where I've been. I've always been a sort of a look backwards and reflect versus looking forward kind of guy. But I was very intently in that place for months. And the fruit of that reflective period was about 14 or 15 different blog posts. And my style of writing, I looked at that pile of work and I said, I think there's a book.
Yeah.
So I just sort of locked myself away and wrote an additional 5 or 6 brand new chapters. And what came out of that was Upon Reflection. So it was not a book I intended to write, but it's a book that I felt almost compelled to write. And I'm glad I did.
So you start off, you said something right there. You said you've always been kind of a look backwards kind of to look forward kind of guy.
Sure.
I don't know a lot of people who necessarily do that. So the whole first section, part one, is learning from the past.
Mhm.
Why is that so important for us?
In our professional work, I do very similar work. I think we both meet people every day that are always chasing. They're always focusing on what's next. And I see value in looking into the future, but I've always found, and I think I learned this from my parents and wise mentors over the years, it's always a good idea to think about where you've been. So as I get older, more and more, I just think about, what have I learned? Where have I failed? Where have I succeeded? What are the lessons that I can draw from every encounter, everything that I work on, family, personal work? I mean, whatever it is, I find that if I just think about where I've been and what I've done, there's usually a nugget or two that comes out of that reflective moment. So as I get older, I've learned more and more to value that. And I talk about it a lot in my work, and I think this book really reflects a lot of that thinking.
So are there ever cases where you look back and you say to yourself, wow, I maybe haven't moved the needle as much as I wanted to there, or I feel like I'm kind of I'm seeing a pattern that I want to change. Is that ever sometimes the outcome?
Daily.
Okay.
No, I often look back and see, gosh, I've just got to make some changes. I've got to do some things differently. So yeah, and it can apply to something as simple as my health. I see bad routines, foods I'm eating, things I need to do differently with exercise. Maybe it's the way that I engage with my family. I've seen some patterns where maybe I've been a little too stressed or anxious and focused on, work, when I need to really put that aside and think about my family. In fact, the very first chapter of the book is titled Savor the Moment. And it's me looking back through the prism of a recent vacation that was it was a great vacation filled with memories, but it made me think about all the vacations where I wasn't as present as I should have been. Hence the name Savor the Moment, because I really figured in that vacation, I realized that I need to savor every moment with these people who I love. And I look back daily and say, lots of patterns I need to change.
So it's almost doing that kind of assessment of where have I made progress, and doing a little bit of healthy celebration around that.
Sure.
And acknowledging, where you've kind of grown and learned and how you're in a different place, but also the places where maybe you still have opportunity to grow and learn.
Absolutely. And I think there's something very key to make all of this work. There's kind of a glue that makes all this work, a secret sauce. It's not enough just to look back. You have to look back on moments where you've actually been fully present. You have to be able to look back and remember that conversation with a loved one, or maybe that difficult dialogue with a client or a colleague at work. And not only just remember, oh yeah, we had a conversation, but what did we talk about? How did we both feel? How did I show up? Did I show up well? What would I have said differently if I could? So I think it's very important, if you're going to be reflective, to also have things to reflect on. So you need to be present with people when you're with them.
Yeah. So you can have those kind of, those points, those moments where you can really say, did I, given I was all in, did I show up the way I wanted to? Was it really how I wanted to be? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then you move into part two, which is practical lessons for busy leaders, which I think is such an important kind of element for us. And I mean, there's so many things in here I've heard you talk about so many times. One of them in here that I think just hearing you do different talks to leaders and hearing them just resonate with certain concepts, one of them is this whole idea of time thieves.
Yeah.
So would love for you to just unpack that a little bit when you talk about time thieves, because as I've heard you say before, I'm butchering this, Randy, so you have to give me lots of grace, my friend. But essentially, our calendars rule us, but we need to be more of a masters of our calendars. We need to take back control.
Sure.
But realistically, most everyone listening to this is saying, yeah, I basically just follow whatever Microsoft Outlook tells me to do every day. I just follow. Right. Ping 15 minutes. I got to meet. Okay, I got to that meeting. I just follow whatever it tells me. And there's time thieves that can jump in there and grab a hold of our calendar and then yank the steering wheel to the left and to the right. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit more about what is a time thief, and sure. how do you stop that?
That is one of my favorite chapters. Every now and then, and it doesn't happen very often, I do feel like I get a burst of inspiration that will show up in my writing. And the way that chapter starts out is I describe a very familiar crime scene. And the crime scene is your calendar. And you think about all the crimes that are committed on your calendar every single day. So what the chapter does is it talks about the various ways that we lose time. And I identify a number of often, innocent time thieves that are stealing time. So when people schedule meetings with you with no agendas, you're not really sure what your role is in the meeting. You're asked to be on a 2-hour conference call, but you find out after the call that you actually had no role. You were just there. When people invite you and 3 people from your team to come to a meeting when really only one of you needed to show up. There are so many different ways that people steal our time. Again, it's not malicious. It's just, I think corporate cultures are trained that, in order to really do our jobs, we've got to be in meetings all day. We've got to be in front of each other. And yet that's not really a very effective way to do our jobs. One of the statistics I cite in the chapter is last year, I can't remember who did the survey, but 73% of meetings in American businesses were deemed unproductive. That blows my mind. 73%.
Wow.
So you think about time theory from the perspective of just unproductive meetings. So the chapter really goes through all the various ways to not only identify them, but some respectfully candid ways that you can engage with those time thieves and start to get them to stop stealing your time. It's this idea of saying no.
Yeah.
I will no longer do this. Let me give you an alternative.
So I know there's listeners right now, if not all the listeners right now, if not you listening this moment right now, can immediately think of a time thief.
Oh, sure.
Okay. And so I know that person's already popped in their mind. And they're thinking, okay, Randy, I want to read the book. I'm going to buy the book. But give me just a practical tip right now. How do I say something respectful to them to say, hey, knock it off?
Right.
What's maybe a good sentence stem or an example of an approach?
So there's a step that goes into this before you can actually have that conversation. So one of the things that I advocate in the chapter is do a calendar audit. So actually print maybe the last 2 weeks of your calendar, like physically print it. And I want you to go through with a highlighter. And I want you to highlight every meeting, every phone call, everything that you did during those days that you look back and say, gosh, that was not a productive use of my time. And then you also want to identify who invited you to that call or meeting or whatever. So that's where you get your list from. And then when you're sitting down with these individuals, again, notice I said respectful candor. So I'm sitting down with Brandon, and maybe the conversation goes like this. Hey, Brandon, listen, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for always including me in your weekly staff meetings. I know that your intention is for me to be, in the know on what's going on with your team. So thank you. I just want to say thanks. I've really had to realign my priorities of late, and I'm really starting to think about where I spend my time. So I wanted to ask you, would you mind if we take me off the invite list? I'm going to need to catch up with you maybe for a 5 or 10 minute call by the end of the week to see if there's anything I missed. Or we might want to consider sending Jane or Bill from my team. They probably are a little bit more attuned to the work, but I'm not going to be able to attend each week, but I wanted to let you know why. So respectful tone, I was very clear about thanking them, showing gratitude.
Yeah.
But then I gave alternatives. I wasn't just saying, stop inviting me, you clown. I mean, that never left my lips. I was respectful and gave you alternatives. That's the thing that makes people cringe about, saying no to anything. They always think there's going to be an adverse reaction. But if you say no with alternatives and you're respectful, it works almost every time.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And sometimes we're in our own way. Like I have a leader that I was coaching that he was going to these meetings with his team. Then one day he realized, my team's there.
Yes.
I don't need to be there.
Right.
They can handle it without me. And he started declining those invites. One more thing that just drives me crazy. I wish every organization, when people were in meetings, I wish it's like a pop-up video. Way back when VH1 used to have pop-up videos, and a little pop-up above people's heads would be their hourly rate, and the meter would turn on.
Yes.
I think if leaders could see that, they would not invite all the people they invite. It's like, well, I'm inviting 8 people to this meeting, and when you add up their hourly rates, that's an expensive meeting. That could be a $5,000 meeting. To talk about something that I could have sent out in a communication.
Well, totally right. And I think that one of the things that's really key to this chapter is I give you lots and lots of ways to counter time thieves. One of them is to recognize also that sometimes we are the time thief. So the chapter is titled, How to Identify and Thwart Time Thieves and Not Become One. So one of the things that I give the reader is sort of a maxim, sort of a thing to think about, is before you invite a colleague to a meeting or a call, this is what you should consider. I'm about to appropriate, that's a really good word, appropriate an hour or 2 hours of my colleague's time. Is it worth it? I'm asking them to give up an hour of a valuable 8-hour workday. Can I justify actually inviting them to that meeting, or is there an alternative? I wonder if I could achieve the objective with an email. I wonder if a 10-minute conference call would do. So if all of us would just pause and say, wait a minute, before I invite Brandon, Susan, Whitney, and Isaac to a meeting, I better make sure that I can really justify their investment of time. Yeah. So that alone would change this paradigm completely if we took the time to think about it.
And I know for you and I, often when we're working with clients, whether we're on the front end and we're designing something or on the back end, we're doing a debrief, typically 30 minutes is the charm.
Yes.
We can do it all in 30 minutes. We can identify needs, create a design, figure out next steps, all in 30 minutes. We don't need an hour. And so also being creative and not necessarily always doing the rote hour meeting. I've had people, just send me an invite for a meeting. There's an hour. I say to myself, that's a 15-minute call. That doesn't need to be an hour. And then I'll come back to them and say, I'm sorry, I'm not available for this, but I am available here. And we typically make the adjustment. Well, Randy, I think that's great. So there's another chapter in that section that I want to go to. Also, one of your greatest hits, because when I think about all the programs that we deliver at Leadership Foundry and when we get the feedback at the end of our programs, and the leaders say what stood out for them the most. Tied for number one is Candor. Okay, so you have a chapter in there. It's chapter 14. What can a 12th century saint teach modern leaders about candor?
Oh, that's one of my favorites.
Well, I would love to hear, my friend. So tell us, what could this 12th century saint teach us?
So let me bore you for 90 seconds with a quick history lesson.
Okay.
So for those who don't know, St. Thomas Becket was named by, I think it was King Henry II, as the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1170. So this saint, who was a very learned man and a friend of the king, was on his way to his ordination at Canterbury Cathedral, literally walking down the road, and he had a trusted companion with him. And what we know about that conversation that's been passed down through history is he turned to his companion, and I'm going to paraphrase, so bear with me. He said something like this, I want you to come to me in secret and tell me when I do wrong, for it is dangerous for men in power to not have candid voices in their lives. And it's such a riveting statement that has so much application to daily life in the business world, where leaders, when they, as they ascend through the ranks and grow in their careers, men or women, they often find that they don't have those candid voices in their lives. They get a lot of lip service. They get people that say, boss, you're the greatest. You're amazing. Everything's wonderful. No problems here. And it's dangerous for those leaders to not have access to candid feedback, to real honest data, to a realistic look at how the company's doing. So the chapter talks about, through the example of St. Thomas Becket, we need to make sure we keep those honest voices in our lives. And one of the things that I advocate, that's one of my favorite strategies, I always coach my clients to do it, is I don't care what your title is, if you're the CEO, CFO, doesn't matter. I want you to be comfortable going into the front lines of your company on a frequent basis and asking the frontline troops, hey, what's going on around here? What do you see? And I also love to go to the newest employees. If you've got someone on the team with less than 60 days, that's the person you want to go have a cup of coffee with and say, hey, let's have a safe conversation. I want you to tell me what you see around here. That person has not yet been indoctrinated into the anti-candor mob. So this person's probably going to give fresh perspectives. So anyway, I think it's critical, and I think you'd agree, leaders have to have people that tell them the truth.
Yeah, so building those relationships, also part of it is when you talk about the kind of St. Thomas Becket, he knew that once that ordination happened, it was going to be really hard to find that candid voice. So he quickly got it before that happened.
Yes.
Like if you become president or CEO and then now you're looking for candid voices within the organization, it's a little harder. You want to get those trusted voices before you get to that level. It'll be a little easier.
Yeah, but you also have to look for those honest voices elsewhere. It may not just be in your direct report team. Maybe you find them outside the company. You need to have a group that is always willing to tell you the truth, that give you that candid insight. So I advocate in the chapter, have coaches, mentors, people that can objectively tell you what's really happening. So if you can't find it in your immediate vicinity of your colleagues, maybe you go outside to get it. But you can never fly blind without candid insight. You and I do that for each other because we own a business together. But in companies that we work with, we know those leaders that are not told the truth, and they are headed towards disaster.
Okay, so let's take candor before we move off of it. Let's flip to the other side.
Sure.
Now you feel like you want to be that person to give candor.
Sure.
You want to give that candid feedback to that leader because you care about that leader.
Sure.
You care about the organization and the business, and you see a pattern that is not going to bode well, but you're not sure how to do it. How do we start that conversation?
So can we dive into Randy Hain's famous permission rule?
Absolutely. That's where I was hoping you'd go.
So here's the scenario. You just laid it out beautifully. I want to give some difficult feedback, but I don't really know you, or maybe I'm a little concerned about how you'll receive the feedback. So this is what I always encourage clients to say, and I practice it myself. Hey, listen, Brandon, I've got an observation I want to share with you about our meeting yesterday. We were in a meeting together, and I want to give you some insight, but I want to ask you, are you open to this feedback? Are you open to me giving you some candid feedback about yesterday? And then you pause. And I've been doing this for 23 years, and everyone says yes. No one has ever said, well, no, you can't give me a candid observation. No, they always say yes. So once you've done that, I want you to picture that an invisible wall has come down. And once that wall is down, now you may still not be excited that I'm about to give it to you, but you gave me permission and I was courteous. So now that the wall is down, I have an opportunity to go through a door with you and give you the observation. But it's not enough just to give you the observation. I could say, hey, Brandon, I just want to let you know your presentation yesterday was terrible. Have a good day. That's like putting a hand grenade on the table. My obligation is to be helpful and really do something that is courteous and helpful. So I might say, hey, Brandon, yesterday in the presentation you gave, I really loved where you were going with the theme. I thought it was really well done. But there were some slides that you showed that had some data that I think might be a little off. I've done some research on this. I think I've got the up-to-date data. Would you mind if I help you maybe correct those two slides so next time you'll have exactly the current data that we need? I'm very glad to help you with that if you're open to it. So I pointed out that maybe the presentation didn't land as well as it could have. I was respectful, but then I offered to help you. And I think that's the secret recipe to being candid and helpful and moving a conversation and an outcome into the right direction.
And there's also an element, you didn't call it out directly, but I know you well enough to know there's also a level of honesty that needs to go in here too. You're going to be honest. You're not going to let courteousness and helpful gloss over also the presenting opportunity.
Yeah, I think, I'll use the word. I think it's candor with love, because you need to appreciate and understand that when I'm being candid with you, I'm doing it from a desire to be helpful. I care enough about you to tell you the truth. And I, as an experienced leader, have worked for years to make sure that people always know I'm not just telling you this because I want to get it off my chest. I actually would like to help you. And when you feel that sincerity, you're much more likely to receive it and do something with it.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so as we're starting to kind of conclude our conversation, there's a third section in here. And the third section of your book is being good humans. Mm-hmm. So I've got a particular chapter I want to call out around civility. But before I do that, this book in some ways feels a little countercultural. So say a little bit more about that. From your perspective, what feels countercultural about the book? And maybe it's really this third section that really is the countercultural component. I'd be curious your thoughts around that, and then we can talk a little bit about that chapter on civility.
So I agree with you. I think there is a countercultural element. And I think the countercultural elements there are two of them. One is there aren't a lot of books about reflection written for busy business people. You and I engage with these people every single day, these wonderful men and women in business, and they're going so fast. And I think that there aren't a lot of resources out there to really help them get a little bit more grounded, live in the moment, and savor the moment. So I think that element of the book is a little countercultural. But that particular section you're talking about was my desire in my own little corner of the world to try to put out something positive and meaningful that would counter the anger and divisiveness, the vitriol that is everywhere. I mean, you everywhere you turn, there is screaming, there's anger, frustration. We're not talking to each other anymore. So what that section is a series of true stories of men and women. There's business and personal application of people that I've observed that have done things out of kindness, out of goodness, that have, in some of them I experienced firsthand, some I observed. But the section is really meant to give you a number of different ways that will inspire you to show up as a better human being. So it is a little countercultural to put that kind of thing out there. But I also can tell you from the readers that have digested the book, that's their favorite section because it gave them encouragement, hope, and a little inspiration. And for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah, hope is exactly where we need today. So just to kind of, I love the chapter on civility. So I would love to just talk a little more about when you think about civility, what does civility mean to you? And what does that look like?
So that's the accidental chapter in the accidental book.
Okay.
So I was 5 days away from turning the book into my editor.
Oh, really?
And it really,
5 days away.
And I've always wanted to write about civility, but I wasn't sure the right angle. So I get a phone call from someone who's not a friend, an acquaintance. They swim in a similar circle, do similar work to you and me, but I've just known the person for years, but not really friends. And they called me, which by itself was kind of weird because nobody calls anybody anymore. And he said, Randy, I know you to be a reasonable man. And based on your writings and what I know about you, I want to ask your opinion on a very difficult topic. I just would love to get your perspective. So he told me what it was. And I confirmed his assumption about my particular point of view. And he said, can I ask you questions? I just don't understand that side of this argument. And it's a very contentious argument that's very well known in America today. So I gave him my perspective, context, why I feel the way I feel. And 30 minutes went by. He was extremely respectful, very civil. And when I was done, I said—
But just for our listeners' purposes, he had an opposing view.
Well, yes, he did.
Initially. So he was looking at that same issue this way, and you were looking at the same issue this way.
Correct. We were diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
So when I finished, I said, to be fair, I'd like to understand your perspective. And he explained the counter view. Walk through his justification, why he felt that way. So an hour went by. Now, we've been on the phone for an hour, and as scheduled as you and I can be sometimes, this was just an hour that on a Friday afternoon, it was just, I can't believe I had the time available, but I did. And at the end of it, there was silence. And I said, what just happened? And he said, Randy, I just felt like I needed to have the courage to reach out and ask someone what they thought on this topic because all I ever hear is screaming. Everyone's screaming at each other, but no one's talking. I just wanted to get your perspective. Well, what's interesting, we spent 30 more minutes on the phone. We actually have a lot of things in common. And we wound up getting coffee, and I suspect we'll become friends. We found lots of things that we have in common, lots of common ground. So even though this issue, which divides America in many ways, could be something that keeps us apart, we found a lot of other ways to connect and be good humans with each other. So out of that conversation, I developed, and the chapter talks about this, a recipe for civility. And I used some examples from our talk, but also some other ways that we can be more civil and not resort to social media, but actually have a conversation in person or by phone. Talk through things, listen to each other, not rush to judgment. And I think it's a very good sort of end to the book, about we've got to find a way to be more civil and engage with each other. So I'm very proud of it. It was the unexpected chapter, but I think it turned out.
Well, I love that general theme of how can we look for common ground.
Yes.
I was doing just a talk with a special interest group in a technology company.
Uh-huh.
And this was all their employees who were over 40 years old, which seems like a funny special interest group to most people listening to this. That they had maybe 30 employees, and they had about 1,500 overall employees.
Mm-hmm.
30 were over 40.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the individuals in the group, he was an African-American male. He had served in the military at some point, and he stood up and he said, I grew up where, even though we have a lot of differences, I grew up where the goal was to always try and find what was more similar. What was our common ground? he says that just doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you're kind of bringing that back, that how do we kind of look for common ground? And it's okay that we don't necessarily agree on everything, but where can we agree?
You know, you used to be able to find public figures that could sit down in government and church, a number of different places where they could sit down, even though they strongly disagreed, and find a way to work through the issues, talk about them, and at the end of it, shake hands and say, I respect your point of view, but disagree. And that's being lost. And what really worries me is the generations that follow us are going to follow our example. And if our generation, generations that are out there in leadership roles today, can't find a way to be civil and get along, well, we're teaching the folks that are coming into the workplace today, coming into society today as adults, that must be the way we do it. So we've got to push back. So that's another countercultural element of the book is civility by itself is countercultural. We're not talking about it enough. But I hope that people read that and they will pull back from the precipice and start to engage with people that they used to disagree with a little differently.
Beautiful, Randy. So that nice segue into one of my last questions.
Sure.
So second to last question. Folks read this book. They pick it up. It's a beautiful read. It's an easy read. What would you hope would be their takeaway? What would you hope a busy professional would put this book down at the end and say, wow, this is what I got from the book?
I want people that read the book to be much more adept and see the value of pausing and thinking and reflecting. Now that seems very obvious and very basic, but just taking a moment to think about where they are, who they're with. What am I learning from this situation? What am I gaining from my conversation with Brandon? What are the nuggets? And then reflecting a little bit on how do I use that in my life? How do I take it forward? How do I pass it along to others? And if we would stop racing from meeting to meeting, from day to day, from activity to activity, my kids are grown up now, but it used to be work all day, kids' activities all night. You collapse in a heap at 10 o'clock and you start the next day. If I can get people to pull back a little and just live in the moment, that would be a huge takeaway. And that would be my hope for the reader. And this book comes at that topic from so many different angles that there's something in it for everybody. And by the way, I think I've told you this, the introduction and the conclusion are probably the only two places in the book that I actually give some hopeful best practices on how to be reflective. So the beginning and the end are about how to do it. But in the middle of the book, the rest of it is written through the prism of reflection. So I not only give you how to do it at the beginning and the end, but in the middle of it, I simply tell you these are my experiences, but they were written through the prism of reflection.
Beautiful. So you're kind of modeling it for everybody.
Hopefully.
Excellent. So, Leadership Foundry podcast. On this podcast, we always ask all of our guests one closing question. What's one practical tip for us for how we could be better leaders starting tomorrow?
My advice would be, and this is something that the book will help you do, is during the course of the day, do your very best to find some small windows. You and I talk about the concept of air, having air in the calendar. But if you can find time in the morning and the afternoon to simply pause and reflect on who have you encountered today? Who are the people that have crossed my path? Who are the people that I'll be engaging with for the rest of the day? And not only think about those people, but think about what's going on in their world. What can I do best to serve them? How can I help them be successful? If we would stop looking at our days as a series of just, a blur of activity and actually think about, I'm encountering fellow human beings today, workplace, community, work, family. And if I can just be more present, think about what they need from me, and maybe even think about what can I ask them for that maybe I need in my own life. If we could get to that place of awareness each day, I think the world would be a better place. That's my advice to anyone, business leader or whoever.
Beautiful. Well, excellent, my friend. I can't say enough about this beautiful read and how important it is to just transform people's perspective on their life, both where they currently are, but how they want to live, which I think is the intent behind the book.
Absolutely.
And so I would encourage everyone to pick up a copy and get it. And it's available on Amazon and other places that folks can kind of buy books.
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Well, as always, my friend, absolute pleasure. Look forward to the next time we get to get on the podcast together.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
of course, no surprise, I've got lots of notes. I loved my conversation with Randy. There's so many little nuggets in there, and he structured his book so well. Randy's a very structured guy, and he's got that first section really upon reflection, really thinking about what does it mean to reflect and think about your time. And I love that he said, he just makes it a habit for himself to think about where I've been, both what's worked and what hasn't, and maybe what are some things that he wants to continue to work on and adjust, but also celebrate the progress we've made. Section 2 is practical tips for those busy professionals. We spent some time really on time thieves. And those are those individuals which we know them well. They take time on our calendar, time we could be dedicating to other things like reflection and how to manage those a little bit better. We even learned in my conversation with Randy from a 12th century saint on how to practice candor a little bit more practically and in a more helpful way and a courteous way. And then finally, Randy landed the plane with us today on civility and how we can show up as better humans and looking for that common ground with each other. There was plenty more in my conversation with Randy. I'm sure a few things stood out for you. I highly encourage you to purchase the book. Again, it's available on Amazon. Upon Reflection, Helpful Insights and Timeless Lessons for the Busy Professional. I know there's so much in this book that I can benefit from it. I have already benefited from. So, of course, until our next podcast, I hope you took away something today that's not only going to make you a better leader today, but a better leader starting tomorrow.